Hi everybody, in this video we're going to continue learning more about components. We saw a little bit earlier, we talked about components and how to create them, we learned about styling components, but now we're going to tie all that together and go a little deeper into learning more what components can do and how you want to build them. So here's the thing, the components we've been building so far, they've been good at helping us get a good grasp of the syntax and how React treats them, but they aren't really representative of how you'll be building components in the real world. It's great to be able to have some vowels showing up behind a colorful background, but that's not really how you'll be dealing with UI, especially if that's a problem you're dealing with. Congratulations, you probably have a very cushy problem to solve and you don't have to go any further. But I'm almost certain that you need to learn more about components to be able to be productive in the real world. And so we're not going to go all the way to productivity in the real world just yet, but we're going to be taking steps in that direction. And so the first thing we're going to do is look at a more complex example. We're going to make what's known as a color palette card. Now, if you've ever done any kind of a home improvement project that involves painting or been to a painting store, you've probably seen walls and walls of these cards that give you an idea of all the various colors that are available and what they might look like. And so here's our variation of that, where we have a region of some color and you have a hex code below it that corresponds to what that color actually does. So what we're going to do is create this in React. And so to create some UI in React, there are two things you need to do. The first thing is you need to identify the major visual elements. And the second one is figure out what the components will be. And this is something that is going to be really on your court to figure out. Your designers or the person involved with providing the visual comps and the visual idea will create the high level overview of what the UI will look like. It's up to us, the ones who are using React, the ones who are the developers who will have to implement this, to figure out how to break the UI down into the more manageable pieces. And so let's take a look at what that means. So at a high level, if you look at the palette card as a whole, it's one giant visual element, or at least you can think of it that way. But in reality, though, it's made up of many smaller components. One of the things that is partly art, then more than science, is trying to build a visual hierarchy of all the various visual things that are going on with the thing you're trying to represent. And so let's break this UI up a little bit. So we know that our palette card has two distinct regions. One is the area that displays the color, and the other is the part that displays the label, the color, the hex value that corresponds to the color you're seeing there. So we can break up our one gigantic visual element into two smaller elements that are more manageable. And now we can also go further. We can also go from having the white region with the label into just the white region, the label itself. Now that is another level of dividing up our UI into smaller individual pieces. But really though, there is a balance you need to strike. On one hand, having just one view of your content as just one palette card might be too few elements. Going as far as we did right now into breaking up our UI into many smaller pieces, that would be going too far as well. That's really where a balance needs to be struck. And so the question is this: what is the best way to structure your content? And there is no right or wrong answer, but my guidance is this. In general, you want to have components that do just one thing. You don't want to have components that do too many things. And if you find yourself in that situation, that might be a good case for you to break up your UI into further smaller components. So into looking at our example so far, we are kind of cool with having the colored region, that region being its own component. So that's fine. And so that's one visual element that we'll deal with. But what about the label, the background of the white background with the hex value? What do we do there? And so for that one, we can say that all that component is really doing is displaying the label. It doesn't really have to deal with displaying the background color. It's not going to change. It's not going to do much. So it's just a minor visual scaffolding on top of the real value it's providing, which is the label itself. And so the hierarchy we just described is not just a visual hierarchy, it also maps to the component hierarchy as well. And the more you can be precise in how your visuals are divided, the easier it'll be for you to define your components as well. And I mentioned the word components a few times already as part of this example, and that's deliberate. It's because there isn't a distinction you should be making too much. And so what we're going to do is take a look at what we've just broken up our UI into. Let's go ahead and build our example. And so for this, I'm going to go back to my code editor. It's Visual Studio Code. And the starting point is the same as the starting point you might have seen before. Some minor tweaks here and there. For example, I have our HTML has a div element with ID value of container. And we have script type equals text.babel. text/babel. That's important to ensure our browser can render content properly. And then we just have the React download render call that prints right now an empty div to the element that is stored by container. And just to round things out a bit, there is a style rule for a container element that is a padding of 50 pixels and a background color of white. So as you can tell, nothing too crazy going on here. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and start defining the components that we will be dealing with. And so what I'm going to do first is there are going to be 3 components. One for our square, one for the label, and one for the card itself. And the square is the colored region you're going to see here. The label is the text you see below. And the card is the component that kind of ties everything together. All right, let's start with the square component first. Class square extends react.component. And inside it will be a render. And we'll be returning. Right now, we're going to keep the returns pretty simple. It's just going to be a break statement. We'll make it more elaborate in a little bit. And right now, we're creating this to empty components. So feel free to copy the square component right now and just rename it. So I'm copying the square component copying it once, pasting it twice. So I'm renaming the second square component to label, and the third, well, now the last component we just copied and pasted into card. So right now, you should have 3 components, all not doing a whole lot. They're just printing some things to the screen, which is just a BR tag. And if you look at react.render call, nothing is actually being done. So let's go ahead and return. Actually, no, returning a div is fine. We don't have to worry about finishing the example right now. So just make sure to have 3 empty components that will start filling out with content in a little bit. And let's go ahead and also just refresh the page to make sure nothing is breaking, and nothing is breaking. So great. So let's start with the card component first. And so for the card component, it's going to be, if you go back to the slides, the card component is really going to be the top part right here. And as we talked about earlier, it's just going to be housing the square component and the label component. So let's go back here. And so for the card component, let's modify some of these things here. So inside render, I'm going to have var card style. Let's go ahead and create the style object that will define how this particular element is going to look. And the semicolon. All right, so let's put height of 200 pixels actually. It's good to have the labels in there if possible. Sorry, not labels, units. 150 pixels. Padding of 0. Background color, we'll give it a background color that is just white. F. And now I want to put a drop shadow. There's several ways you can use drop shadow. You can use the box shadow property, but I'm going to use a filter instead. And partly it's because filters are cool and they're hardware accelerated by default. And so you might as well use it. And I feel like people use filters enough. So just for that reason alone, we use a filter instead. So filter, let's make it a drop shadow, 0 pixels, 5 pixels, hashtag 666. All right, it's gonna be a dark gray drop shadow. And I actually put commas here. The commas don't have to be there for the filter syntax. And so drop shadow 0, 0. What this basically means is that the drop shadow is going to start at the top left corner, no offset at all, and it'll be blurred by 5 pixels. So you'll just see 5 pixels of a drop shadow just coming out of all the edges of the shape that we're dealing with. And so one more thing is that we talked about style properties in the previous video and what the capitalization rules are. And so filter is something that still doesn't have universal support across all the various browsers. So you need to vendor prefix it. And so I'm going to put WebKit filter here because WebKit's one of the browsers that doesn't support it in many older versions without the prefixing. And notice that the way I'm prefixing and specifying the prefix version of it, you'd think that would be WebKit lowercase w, like it would be for background color and things like that. But no, the way it is done is the W is going to be uppercase. Same with if you were to do Moz filter or MS filter. We're not going to do that because they support them already pretty broadly. All right, so I'm going to copy and paste the value for drop shadow and paste it right in here. So just one of the, one more JSX quirk that you need to keep in mind. All right, so next thing, let's go ahead and change the return statement from a break to a div style equals our card style object that we just created. And let's close this div out. And so right now, nothing else going on that's crazy here. And all we're going to do now is in our React download render call, go ahead and print out our card element. All right, so we created the card component, and now we're instantiating the React element render to telling it to go ahead and print. Let's refresh the browser to see if what we have here has actually done something. Perfect. Let me zoom in a bit. All right, so now you can see that we have our card element. Nothing inside it. It's pretty empty, but it is showing a drop shadow. It is with the height and width of 200 pixels and 150 pixels. So great, our card element is pretty much set, so we're in good shape here. So now let's go ahead and deal with the square component. So for square, we're going to do something very similar. Had a style object, so var square style equals, in this case, height is going to be 150 pixels. Let me add that in. And the background color is going to be something slightly different. FF6663. All right, can't go wrong with that value. And now we're going to have a div style set to the style object we just created, square style. And in case you're wondering why it's in curly brackets, it's because we're in JSX territory. And in JSX territory, even though it is JavaScript, expressions don't get evaluated as JavaScript unless you put it inside the curly brackets. And that's why we're doing that. All right, so now we have the square element specified here. And so what we're going to do now, though, is instantiate it inside our card element. So go to your card component. And I keep using the word element, which is what I meant to say is component. And so, yes, technically it is an element, but to be correct, though, it's a component. So inside the card component, inside the return statement and our render method, go ahead and instantiate square. All right, so let's refresh this page now to see what's going on. And okay, there's an error. And let's see why there is an error. Let's go to inspect, console. The error is because the object has been defined outside of the render method. See, normally you think that I should edit this part out because I clearly made a mistake, but I do think it's valuable to be able to identify that something has gone wrong and look at what tips you can find from my mistakes to figure out how to fix it. In this case, it was really just going to the dev tools and clearly seeing the error, which React really does a really good job at identifying and fixing that. So make sure to have your square style object inside your render method, not outside of it, because in the class syntax world, all you can really have are methods inside your class definitions. All right, so now we have one crisis averted. We currently have the square component defined and the card component defined. So we're almost there. We just have to deal with the label. And so the label approach is going to be very similar. We're going to have an object. We're going to call it label style. And this time, it's going to be printed appropriately inside the render method. So no need to bring up dev tools. I'm sure it'll make other mistakes instead, but it won't be the same mistake as last time. And so for label style, we're going to have font family, sans serif, font weight is going to be bold. Padding will be 13 pixels, and margin will just be 0. And this time, instead of having a div element, we'll have a p tag whose style is going to be set to the label style object we just created, and its value is going to be hard-coded to #FF6663, the same color we used for the background color in our square component, because after all, that is the value we want to print on screen. And so now that we have a label component defined, all I need to do is just make sure we instantiate that as well. So go back to the card component, and just below where we have the square component instantiated, go ahead and define the label component just below it. So label defined, and let me go and refresh to see what's going on. I notice now that the color appropriately shows up, which is kind of exactly where we want to go in all of this. And so the last thing we're going to do is, and this goes back to just the kind of things that we like to talk about when it comes to React, is right now I have the card, but wouldn't it be great to be able to define the color as something that isn't hard-coded, but it's more of something we pass in as a prop? I think it'd be a great idea. So let's go back to our square component, and instead of having the background color be hard-coded, let's go ahead and change it to this.props.color. We're going to assume there's going to be a prop called color that gets passed in eventually in a few moments. And likewise, in label, let's go ahead and change the value that you see here to this.props.color. And you can notice that it is in the angled brackets, curly brackets, sorry, because it is going to be rendered dynamically as opposed to just a value that you end up seeing here. And so now under card, I'm going to, we have label square, color equals this.props.color. So just like the square component, let's duplicate this for label as well. So in our label component, we're going to color equals this.props.color as well. Essentially what we're doing is we're just passing some properties up from one component to another component. The component we're going to define our actual color prop in officially is right in card. So in our React.render method, go ahead and add color equals, in this case, the color we actually want. So FF6663. All right. And so just to walk back with what we've just done, going backwards actually, in our card component, we have a color prop defined with the value that we really want. And then what we're doing here inside the card components, we're turning the square and label components, and we're passing in another property called color. And the same value we passed in initially is just being transferred up. And so the end result is where we're displaying the text value is coming from the color prop, and where we're displaying the square value, the color value is coming from, sorry, the square component, the color value is coming from the color prop as well. And note that, this might seem a little confusing because I'm using the same prop named color throughout. It doesn't matter what the color prop value is when you're passing it into other components. The only part that needs to match is this.props.color in the component you're passing a prop to needs to match the name you're giving the prop right there. You can name your new prop whatever you want, as long as you make sure you're consuming it with the new name directly. So just to add a little bit more confusion to what is otherwise a pretty simple example. So, all right. And so what we've done right now is, if I refresh this page, everything should work just fine. And of course, we kind of start with the same values, so that's probably not the most representative of everything working properly. Let's make it 6 values of 3. So 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. And let's refresh the page now. And yep, as you can see, the dark gray value specified for the current component is now what you see now for your label as well. If you want a slightly nicer color like FFA737, let's just add one more color while we're at it. You have a much nicer orange color to set things off with. And so the thing to keep in mind is everything we've done so far is compose components, basically. If you look at our React.render call, we have the card component, which in turn is actually made up of a call to the square component and label components. It's component composability is the name of this particular approach we're talking about here. And that's kind of really cool. And the thing to keep in mind is all of this is done just from a developer-centric point of view. It just helps us. The end result of what we see in the browser has no knowledge of all the components that are going in to make this work. If anything, if you look at the final output in HTML form, as of all the JSX and React magic that goes on, what you see looks something like we see on screen right now. Just have a few div elements. You have the inline styles that we specified as part of the style objects right here, card style, label style, and square style. And then you just have the value that is printed on screen. You don't see any of the complexities that went into building it, which is one of the nice things about React is that the output is just normal HTML, CSS, JavaScript without all of the extra frills and formatting. It's actually a very nice compact markup if you just want to ignore some of this inline styling that is going on here. And so with that, let's go ahead and wrap things up because we've covered more ground in learning more components than we did before. We not only did a review of building components and using some styling, we also composed up components by nesting them, by having them be called and passing properties between them, which is a little bit more complex than what we've done before, but nowhere there yet. But we will look at more complex examples as time goes on. And so with that, if you have any questions, post in the forums at forum.corp.com, where I and others will be pretty happy to help you out with your question. If you like this video, if you like the content, tell your friends. It's probably the best way to be able to share your knowledge of React with others is to have other people learn with you. That is also good. And also your enemies. It's always good to have people you dislike also know about what you're working on. Hit subscribe to be notified of new videos, and also makes my subscriber count go up, which is a measure of popularity and success in the world today. And so that's a good thing. Follow me at Twitter at Krupa, where you'll see all sorts of videos and links to web development stuff, cat videos, science gifs, just things that I find interesting that hopefully you find interesting as well. And of course, there's a book called Learning React, where if you don't like videos or don't like looking at content in a browser, you can look at a physical paperback edition where you can flip through pages and use the paperweight if you have no use for it. So, but totally cool. Check it out. Learning React. All right, guys. I'll see you guys next video.